welcome to Lawyer of the Week. Lawyer of the Week is creating a global community of lawyers, solicitors, and their support to inform and to encourage each other.
Hi, my name is Pamela Deneuve, and I help successful and focused lawyers to achieve peak performance and to create their legacy. Please join us for the interview with a peak performing lawyer this week. My name is Pamela Deneuve, and welcome to Lawyer of the Week. I am so pleased and honored this week to have Brian Cuban. He is the younger brother of the Dallas Mavericks owner and entrepreneur, Mark Cuban. He's a Dallas-based attorney. He's author and addiction recovery advocate. He is a graduate of Penn State University and the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. Brian has been in long-term recovery from alcohol, cocaine, and bulimia since April of 2007. His first book, Shattered Image: My Triumph Over Body Dysmorphic Disorder, chronicles his firsthand experience living with and recovering from 27 years of eating disorders and body dysmorphic disorders. Brian's most recent best-selling book, The Addicted Lawyer: Tales of the Bar, Booze, Blow, and Redemption, is an unflinching look back at how addiction and other mental health issues destroyed his career as a once successful lawyer, and how he and others in the profession redefined their lives in recovery and found redemption. Brian has spoken at law schools, colleges, university, conference, nonprofits, and bar association events across the United States and in Canada. Brian has appeared on prestigious talk shows such as The Katie Couric Show, as well as numerous media outlets around the country. He also writes extensively on these subjects. His columns have appeared, and he has just been quoted on these topics on CNN.com, FoxNews.com, The Huffington Post, Above the Law, The New York Times, and in online and print newspapers around the world. Welcome, Brian. So, Brian, I'd like to ask you our Lawyer of the Week questions. When and what made you decide to become a lawyer?
I never really wanted to be a lawyer. I was struggling with a lot of mental health issues in college at Penn State. I was already a quote-unquote alcoholic at that point. And I was really looking for ways to not have to go out in the real world and face my mental health issues. I owned my eating disorder. I owned my drinking problem. I had also become exercise bulimic, which is obsessive compulsive exercise for the primary purpose of offsetting calories. So I was dealing with addiction and an eating disorder and clinical depression. So I was looking for ways where I could repeat cycles and not have to go out in the world. And I was a criminal justice major. I wanted to be a police officer. That would have worked out well, right? With my cocaine addiction, I eventually became addicted to cocaine. I'd have been stealing the cocaine right out of the evidence room. But there were a couple guys talking about going to law school, and all the bells started going off in my head. Not that I wanted to be a lawyer, but that it was an opportunity to hide for 3 more years where I could drink, run 10 to 20 miles a day, binge and purge, and not have to answer to anyone and isolate, which is what I had become accustomed to. These destructive behaviors had become like breathing to me. So I decided, okay, yes, I will apply to Pitt Law. I did okay on the LSAT. I applied to Pitt Law. I got in. And that's why I went. I did not go to change the world, make a lot of money. I went to hide for 3 years and repeat the same cycles that I went through at Penn State in dealing with mental health issues. Now, I look back and obviously I wasn't a very good student, as you might imagine, but I got my law degree and it has certainly benefited me along the way. I value it.
Certainly. When do you think that that your condition was really out of control?
It's progressive. Addiction is progressive. So you can look back at different moments. I don't think there is any bright line for quote unquote out of control,
Mm-hmm.
but there are certainly moments. I've been to a psychiatric facility twice,
Mm-hmm.
once after a near suicide attempt,
Mm-hmm.
3 failed marriages. One more, I get a free set of steak knives, right? 3 failed marriages. I've been to jail.
Mm-hmm.
So you can point to different moments where you can say it was quote unquote out of control. But again, addiction's progressive and it just gets worse, worse, and worse
Right.
till you finally hit your quote unquote rock bottom,
Mm-hmm.
which is different for everyone. And I don't even like that term. I prefer recovery tipping point.
What were some of the struggles that you had when you practiced law initially, when you were in your addiction?
That's a very good question. And it goes to what I call the myth of the high functioning alcoholic or the high functioning lawyer who may be struggling with alcohol problems.
Mm-hmm.
And people in the firm or people in the courtroom, your colleagues, they say, okay, well, he's making his meetings, he's attending his hearings, he just had a good result in a trial. Yes, we see he has these issues, but he's high functioning, so we don't have to say, so we're not going to say anything about that. You tell yourself you're high functioning, right? Well, we're dealing with these issues, but it's really what I call the Peter principle of recovery. There is the level of high functioning that we have if we're in recovery and everything's going well, or somebody who doesn't have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But because addiction is progressive, whether it's alcohol or drugs, that level we set for ourselves lower and lower and lower. But we keep readjusting what's normal for ourselves as lawyers as we deal with these things. And we keep telling ourselves we are high functioning.
Yes.
And so I went through that same thing where at first I had several very good years as a lawyer. Well, I was able to, go to trial. I was able to go to the court. I was, returning my calls. I was working cases. I was doing all these different things, even though I was also doing cocaine, drinking, even showing up to courtrooms hungover, doing cocaine in the bathrooms of the courthouse, doing cocaine in the bathroom of the law firm, and doing all these things. But for a while, telling myself I'm doing okay, even though other people may have noticed the decrease, but they didn't say anything to me, right?
Right.
Because you're afraid. Is he really? Is there something that's really wrong? Should I say anything? Will I embarrass him? What if I'm wrong? Lawyers go through this all the time. And finally, high functioning becomes boom, where it just drops off a cliff, and that's different for everyone. So these things affected me to the point where eventually it went boom, and I had no clients left. I was basically unable to maintain my law career. My law career collapsed. Now, your viewers are probably wondering if I've been disbarred or suspended. The answer is no, but it wasn't for a lack of trying. As I went through that stuff. So, I mean, it got to the point where you look back, when my brother bought the Dallas Mavericks in 2001, they went to the championship for the first time in 2006, playing the Miami Heat. We lost. I was trading championship tickets to my cocaine dealer for cocaine, doing these things. And this was my life. This was the degradation of my life, the degradation of my career. And one of the biggest issues that I have talking to lawyers and trying to help lawyers come to this realization is getting them to understand that if you're not in recovery and dealing with these issues, and getting their colleagues to understand that too, as they say, we're not going to, he's high functioning.
Mm-hmm.
Today is as good as it's ever going to get.
Yeah.
Addiction only gets worse. Functioning only gets worse. Why wait for the consequences to catch up with the problem? And that is what lawyers tend to do, right? We wait for the consequences to catch up to the problem because we're a profession of thinkers. We believe we can think our way out of it. And I was unable to think my way out of it. And most people cannot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking about the report that came out this year with the National Task Force for Lawyer Wellbeing. I was honored to be a peer reviewer on that report.
Yes. Wonderful report.
Yes. So it's a huge problem that it's killing them.
That's right.
What would you say to those lawyers?
Well, I'd say first, let's put it in perspective. For those who don't believe it's a problem in the profession or it's not a big problem, the President of the United States just declared, the opioid epidemic a national crisis, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at that and look at the statistics from the ABA, Betty Ford Hazelton ABA report that found 20 to 21% of all licensed attorneys are problem drinkers. Over 33% of lawyers practicing under 10 years are problem drinkers. The national average is about 1 in 7 and 1 in 8, and that's also been declared a national crisis. If we're lawyers under 10 years, over 1 in 3, what is that?
Yeah.
We are a profession in crisis.
Yes.
We are almost twice the rate. We are a profession in crisis, and we have to come to terms with that. For lawyers, what I would tell lawyers who are struggling is that you're not alone, okay? One of the hardest things we do as a profession is allow ourselves to be vulnerable. We compartmentalize these things. I can deal with this. I'm earning. I have a family to support. I don't want to lose my ticket, my license.
Mm-hmm.
And we have all these fears. These things without help, this is stuff that may not be today, it may not be tomorrow. This is stuff that's going to happen. These are all consequences that are going to come regardless if you don't get help today.
Absolutely.
And this is such an intellectually hard conversation to have with lawyers. It's an intellectually hard conversation to have with anyone.
Yeah.
Not just lawyers, with anyone struggling, because who wants to face all the demons, all the pain, all the anguish that may delve back to stuff that hasn't been dealt with childhood, from childhood. The one thing that lawyers have such a hard time doing, allow yourself to be vulnerable. Tell somebody, call your lawyer's assistance program. They are confidential. And that's another part of the stigma we have. Lawyers believe they are not confidential. Lawyers believe lawyers' assistance programs, many, not all, but there is a systemic belief that I found, at least from an anecdotal basis. They believe it's an arm of the state bar. If they call the lawyer's assistance program, the state bar is going to find out. They're going to tell the state bar, no, there is not a state that it is not protected by statute, by rule. It's a confidential communication. I'll tell you a funny story that illustrates this. Do we have time?
Yeah, of course.
I'll give you a funny little story. A while ago, maybe this is over a year ago now, I spoke to a Dallas Bar Association event, and I talked about the lawyer's assistance program. One of the lawyers comes up to me after the event, a seasoned trial lawyer. He goes, Brian, I know what you're saying. I understand, but they're not confidential. If I go to the lawyer's assistance program, it's going to get out to the state bar. They're going to, and then I'm in trouble. Then we'll get in trouble. Well, how do you know? They're protected by statute. I get it, but it'll get out. How do you know that? Another lawyer told me. Well, how does he know that? I don't know how he knows that. So you're a seasoned trial lawyer and you're coming to me with a guy told a guy who told a guy that it's not confidential. Would you go with that in a courtroom, right? And he laughed about it. He said, I know, but it's not confidential. This is a problem we have. And this is one of the things I would like to see done differently from a lawyer's assistance program website. And I've got some pushback from lawyer's assistance program officials and employees saying, well, we can't talk about the common issues because we get into practicing law, we get into this and that. I'd like to see all lawyers assistance programs website have in their frequently asked questions, say, here are the common fears lawyers have, and here's the real answer.
Absolutely.
But I've heard from several people, well, we could get into practicing law because we're not under the arm, we are separate from the state bar. Well, let's not talk about why we can't. Let's figure out ways that we can, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is part of changing the paradigm, changing the systemic stigma, figuring out ways that we can alleviate these common fears.
Right. Absolutely. Well, now, can you talk a little bit about your book, The Addicted Lawyer? How did your struggles evolve into your writing your book?
Well, my struggles first evolved into writing a book about body image and my eating disorder recovery. Yes, I have been in I dealt with bulimia for over 2 decades. Guys do get eating disorders. Lawyers get eating disorders. Those are even more stigmatized in the legal profession than drug and alcohol use. It's kind of funny when we talk about it. It's much more acceptable to talk about drugs and alcohol than having an eating disorder. I wrote an article about eating disorders in the legal profession not long ago, and I got a lot of emails from people struggling with eating disorders, guys, men and women.
Mm.
So I wrote a book about that, my struggle with bulimia. About 25% of all those with eating disorders are in fact male. You may not know that.
I didn't know that.
And so that started sort of my book writing, and that was more of a labor of recovery for me, a cathartic experience, as many self-help memoirs are.
Yes.
And after that, I really started getting into addiction advocacy, addiction awareness advocacy. This was after I began recovery. I went into 12-step recovery. I got sober initially in 12-step. I'm also in therapy. I still see a psychiatrist. I'm on antidepressants to deal with clinical depression. I do the full recovery package to the extent I can. And so I started thinking about some of the issues I dealt with in the legal profession, and I really hadn't seen too much about it, too much written. The last study before Betty Ford Hazelton was in 1990.
Yeah.
And I looked around and I'm like, there's really no one talking about this except anonymously on bulletin boards and things like that.
Sure.
So I felt it was a area that needed people to speak up loudly. And I've never been one to be quiet. I'm very transparent about my struggles, but what I went through. I always joke, if my brother decides to run for president, no one's going to have anything on me. Because I've talked about everything. Well, your brother used cocaine. Now, well, I wrote about that, right? Well, he did this. Well, I wrote about that too. So no one will ever have anything on me. I struggled through pit law as an alcoholic and not in recovery, and as a bulimic not in recovery, and it was hard. And this was before lawyers' assistance programs.
Yeah.
This was before we had the residential treatment that we have today. In my day, when I was at Penn State and then at Pitt Law, you were either in 12-step, and as people know, Alcoholics Anonymous is the largest 12-step. You were either in 12-step, or you were in a hospital, or you weren't in recovery. Right. Or at least you weren't in assisted recovery. Many people are in recovery on their own, but you weren't in assisted recovery. So it was a very different era, and I struggled to empower them to find recovery if they are ready at the earliest possible moment, not just in their career, but in their lives.
Yes. How is it having your brother being all over the news and having the teams in Dallas and all that? How has that affected your struggles, do you think?
That's a great question. I get asked that quite often. And what I tell people is I had an alcohol problem, I had an eating disorder, and I had a drug problem long before Mark became internationally famous. So that was not an issue in the genesis of these problems. The genesis of those issues go back to childhood. A lot of issues I dealt with in childhood. So that wasn't an issue, but I was dealing with these issues when Mark became internationally famous. I had no self-identity. I hated myself. Self-image was a big problem of mine. I hated what I looked in the mirror. I wanted to be loved. I wanted to be accepted. I was someone who was always struggling with love and acceptance and loving himself. I was someone who did not have a healthy self-image, self-identity dating back to my teens.
Yeah.
And so when Mark became internationally famous, it became all of a sudden people come up to me and put cocaine. All of a sudden people come up to me and put cocaine in my pocket. I got drugs for free. I could walk into nightclubs for free. All these things that came with what I call name fame that had nothing to do with me, right? They had everything to do with Mark. And I don't blame Mark for this. None of this is his fault. And so it became really logical in my mind at that time just to become Mark Cuban's brother, because I could get all these things and all the and it's fake adulation and it's fake acceptance and it's fake, quote unquote love. I could get all these things that I wanted so badly. And when you have this vacuum of love and acceptance in your body, it's just a vacuum. When all of a sudden you get a taste of it, even if it's fake, it is like, boom, it becomes you. Yeah. It swirls in there and it just becomes you, and you become that. That is how it affected me.
Okay. Well, we encourage peak performance, and you had to be where you are now, to come through your struggles and to be where you are now. You are certainly a peak performer. So what would you say to people who may be struggling and they feel like they have no hope?
I would say to them that there is hope, recovery is possible, but you have to want to take that first step. No one can make you do it. And the things that I have, if we're going to talk about peak performance, I don't think, I don't know what my peak is. I'm always trying to do the next right thing, be a better Brian. I'm always trying to raise my peak through therapy, through self-exploration, through, continuing to go to 12-step to the extent I do. And I'm always trying to raise that peak.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we don't know how high, you'll never know how high that peak can be unless you find recovery. And with recovery, anything is possible.
Oh, I like that. I like that. I do believe that. I think that we can achieve or work towards our peak performance until they put dirt in our face.
That's
Until
right.
it's over.
That's right. And working towards my peak performance isn't just writing and speaking. It is self-exploration.
Yes.
It is healing Brian on a daily basis. And that's not a bad thing. I think everyone should work on themselves. I talk to my inner child. Guys hate to hear that. I talk to the little Brian. I tell that little Brian he was loved. I have hard conversations with my psychiatrist. Now I've been married for a year to the woman that stood by me through rock bottom.
Wonderful.
As I repaired myself and healed myself. So I never would have thought that. I never would have thought I could have had a long-term relationship. I never thought I would have had a happy career and doing things that I'm passionate about, even though it's not the same thing I did before. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean every lawyer will do that. I know many lawyers who have gone through these struggles. They had their license suspended. They've gone back and they've made it. They have survived and they are prospering as lawyers. I also know lawyers who, because they did things that have consequences while in the depths of addiction, that does happen. They can no longer practice law. They have also redefined their lives, and they are doing wonderfully.
We touched on this a little earlier, but I think we can't talk about this enough, because obviously there are a lot of people out there who are struggling, who are in addiction or alcoholism or drugs. They're trying to hold on. And and you said that people are afraid, and this is true. They're afraid to come forth and go to get help. What are some alternatives if they're so paranoid about going to the help that's available within the legal profession?
There are many alternatives. Or if you're not into the 12-step thing, there's smart recovery, which is more cognitive behavioral based. It is not based on the 12 steps. There is, if you're Christian, if you like the more Christian focus, there is Celebrate Recovery. You don't have to go through, I think lawyers assistance programs are wonderful. Florida Lawyers Assistance Program is absolutely incredible, setting the way. TLAP, Texas Lawyers Assistance Program, is incredible. And there are many incredible lawyers assistance programs who want to help you. But if you're afraid of that, you don't need them to do these things. You don't need them to go into therapy. You don't need them to take first steps into any kind of recovery like that. You can do these things on your own. There are many alternatives. There are online I've had lawyers email me, and I've given them online groups, rooms, bulletin boards, like In the Rooms. If you're familiar with In the Rooms, it is one of the largest support online recovery communities in the world, where they have non-12-step, 12-step, and there's a lot of support in there. There is all kinds of peer support that you don't have to go through the legal assistance program for.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I've had that with some of my clients, and they've gone online. And they've gone on
I've had that too. I've had lawyers who just refuse. I'll put it out there that it's confidential, but some lawyers they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
So, but you still, if you don't, there's always a reason not to recover, right? Mm-hmm. Fine, you don't want to do that. Here it is.
Yeah.
Here's the path you can take. Here's this path. Here's that path. You have to choose. All I do is lay out alternatives. You have to choose, and you have to start walking forward. And it's scary, I know, but it's worth it.
Yes. Well, Brian, what legacy would you like to leave?
As many people in long-term recovery as I can.
That's wonderful. So the last question I always ask my lawyers of the week, and that is, name one thing that you do to manage your stress levels.
I take long showers where I do a lot of meditation, talking to myself, thinking. I spin, exercise in moderation. I spin, which is indoor biking, exercise. My wife and I do things. So it's not a one thing. I have different things.
Mm-hmm.
I've become very comfortable. I play with my cats, my 2 cats.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a person who has to be out there in the social scene.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of things that are just me, my wife, showers, mindfulness in the shower.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a meditation person, but
Mm-hmm.
I do just a lot of thinking. And I had a hip replacement, so I don't run like I used to, but now and then I'll do fast walks where I just clear my head. So there are many different things. There are many different paths.
Mm-hmm. Great. So we're going to leave your links at the bottom, but just for any organization that may want to have you come speak at their group, what is the best way to contact you?
You can go to my website where in the upcoming events, you can see every event that I have booked. You can email me through that, or just email me at Brian with an I at briancuban.com, and I will connect you with the people who book those things for me.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Brian, for being our Lawyer of the Week.
Thanks for having me. It was an honor to come on.
Thank you for joining Lawyer of the Week. As always, I encourage and support each one of you to achieve your own peak performance, move your law practice to the next level, and create your own legacy. I love to read your comments about how you achieve peak performance in your law practice below.